Once upon a time, in a small village in Nigeria, there lived a girl named Adana. She was the picture of resilience, though her life was one of hardship. Adana was born on a rainy night that left the village with little hope that she'd survive. Her mother, Amoka, had fallen ill just after giving birth and passed away before she could even hold her daughter in her arms. Adana's father, Chief Okoro, was heartbroken but loved his little girl dearly, raising her as both a father and mother. However, as the years passed, Chief Okoro began to worry about his daughter growing up without a mother figure. He wanted her to have someone to care for her, someone who could teach her the ways of womanhood. When Adana turned 6, Chief Okoro married a widow named Madam Risi, who had 2 daughters around Adana's age, Chika and Neka. At first, Adana was hopeful that Madam Risi would fill the void left by her late mother. She hoped for a kind and loving woman who would treat her as one of her own. But her dreams were quickly shattered. Madam Risi had no love for Adana and saw her only as an inconvenience. Chief Okoro, however, was blissfully unaware of the wickedness hidden beneath his new wife's gentle facade. 3 years later, tragedy struck again. Chief Okoro fell gravely ill, and despite the best efforts of the local healer, he passed away, leaving Adana at the mercy of her stepmother. That day marked the end of her childhood dreams and the beginning of a life filled with endless toil and suffering. With her father gone, Madam Risi wasted no time stripping Adana of every comfort she'd once known. She was forced to drop out of school, while Chika and Neka continued their education. Adana, who had once dreamed of becoming a teacher, watched helplessly as her stepmother sold her books and uniforms to fund the private tutors and new clothes for her stepsisters. Day by day, she grew weaker from the hard labor Madam Risi forced upon her. Adana scrubbed the floors, fetched water, cooked meals, and worked in the fields, all while enduring the scorn and mocking of her stepsisters. "Look at you, filthy and poor," Chika would sneer as she watched Adana scrubbing clothes in a stream. "Who will ever love you?" Neka, never far behind, would add, "You're only good for hard work. Maybe one day you'll marry a poor farmer if you're lucky." Their words stung, but Adana swallowed her tears, choosing instead to focus on the beauty of the world around her, the cool shade of the trees, the sound of the birds singing in the morning, and the comfort of her father's memory. She often prayed silently, asking her mother to watch over her and somehow, someday, bring a change to her life. Years passed, and Adana's situation grew worse. With no schooling and no means to improve her lot, her only purpose in Madam Risi's house was as a servant. Her stepmother even forbade her from attending the village festivals, lest anyone see her and wonder why such a beautiful young girl was treated so poorly. One evening, Madam Risi called Adana into the parlor, a sly smile on her face. "I have good news for you, Adana," she said, her voice dripping with a false sweetness. "I found a man who's interested in marrying you." Adana's heart raced. She had hoped to find love one day, someone who would see beyond her torn clothes and worn hands, but she could tell from the gleam in Madam Risi's eyes that something was amiss. "Yes, an old family friend," Madam Risi continued, "a very wealthy man who lives across the river. You should be grateful, Adana. You may not have brought any dowry to this family, but I am kind enough to see you married off well." Adana's heart sank. She had seen this man at a distance before, a graying man in his 50s, rough in manner and known for his many wives. Yet, she had no choice. Madam Risi had already made the arrangements, and Adana had no one to turn to. Her dreams of escaping her stepmother's household crumbled as she prepared to enter a new life, one filled with the uncertainty of marrying a stranger. The wedding was set to take place within the month, and Madam Risi seemed almost too eager to hurry it along. She showered Chika and Neka with new jewelry and dresses for the wedding while dressing Adana in an old wrapper and simple headscarf. "After all," she sneered, "this is no grand affair." On the day of the wedding, as Adana sat quietly in the dimly lit parlor, a knock on the door drew everyone's attention. The elderly man she had been promised to entered, dressed in traditional attire, and with him was a tall, handsome young man with a confident smile. Adana couldn't believe her eyes. The old man turned to Madame Risi and, after a few pleasantries, gestured to the young man. "This is my grandson, Chijioke. He's recently returned from America, and it's he who will be marrying your daughter." Madame Risi's face dropped, and she glanced at Chika and Neka in a panic. She had not expected this. She thought she was marrying Adana off to an old man, someone who would be easily manipulated, someone she could cast away like an unwanted item. But instead, here was a young, successful man, one who had no interest in her other daughters. Chijioke's eyes softened when he looked at Adana, and as he spoke to her, his words were filled with genuine kindness. "I have heard a lot about you, Adana. And I know life has not been easy for you. I promise you that with me, things will change." Adana looked at him with a mixture of disbelief and gratitude. Could it be true? Could she really have a new life? Madame Risi's initial shock quickly turned to anger, but she masked it with a thin smile, trying to recover her composure. "Oh, what a wonderful surprise," she said through gritted teeth. "Of course, Adana is lucky to have a man like you." The wedding proceeded with haste, and Chijioke took Adana away from the village, much to Madame Risi's chagrin. She had planned to use the marriage to extend her influence, to keep Adana bound within her reach, even if she was married. But now, with her stepdaughter whisked away, Madame Risi found herself alone in her bitterness and anger. Life with Chijioke was a dream come true for Adana. He took her to the city, where she saw wonders she had only heard of before. He showered her with kindness, providing her with the education she had been denied and encouraging her to pursue her dream of teaching. They eventually moved to the United States, where Adana started a new life, filled with opportunities she had never imagined. She built a family, surrounded by love and respect, and left the memories of her stepmother's cruelty behind. Back in the village, Madame Risi's life grew harder with each passing day. With Adana gone, she lost the one person who had done the hard work in her household. Her daughters, spoiled and unskilled, were of little help, and her wealth began to dwindle. The villagers, who had once feared her, began to whisper about the way she had treated Adana. Soon, Madame Risi found herself isolated, her health failing, and her daughters uninterested in caring for her as she had once depended on Adana to care for them. One day, as she sat alone in her parlor, frail and bitter, she received a letter. It was from Adana, and in it, she thanked her stepmother. She thanked her not for the suffering but for teaching her resilience, for showing her what strength meant, and for unknowingly pushing her into a life far better than she could have imagined. Madame Risi clutched the letter, tears streaming down her face as regret filled her heart. She had lost everything, including the one person who had truly deserved her love. And so, Adana lived happily ever after, her past only a shadow, a distant memory of the life she had left behind.